It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Chief Medical Officer at Abliva, and Abliva's mission is to target the powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria, in order to improve the lives of mitochondrial disease patients. So these are my disclaimers. So I thought I'd start off with the investment highlights of Abliva. So we are targeting the underlying pathophysiology of the disease with a platform of compounds. We have a really attractive commercial opportunity. We actually have a pivotal trial ongoing with an interim readout coming up fairly soon. We just had a press release that the last data point for our interim analysis just happened this morning. And our first-in-class assets have a strong regulatory package and IP protection. So we have had some talks during these 2 days about going big, and we have a big ambition. We want to become a global leader in our field, mitochondrial medicine. And that is based on over 3 decades of research in mitochondrial medicine, but also long drug development expertise. So we're based here in Lund, but also in the US. Our CEO, Ellen Donnelly, is based in Boston. And we're a public company listed on Nasdaq Stockholm. So we actually have a great opportunity to serve an unmet medical need that is quite substantial in this field. There's nothing approved for mitochondrial disease. So we've focused, what do we need to do to be successful in this field? Well, first we need to understand the disease, the pathophysiology. And you see a sketch here to the right. For our lead program, we are targeting the NAD plus NADH ratio, and that is a key driver of the energy deficiency that these patients develop. And that leads to a progressive organ dysfunction and disease deterioration. But it's equally important to understand the patient journey and what these patients experience. So we've had a number of interviews with patients, some under a formal setting. So we've had a qualitative interview study to develop one of our primary endpoints in the program. But we also had, of course, a lot of informal interviews. And last week, our chief investigator in our ongoing pivotal trial, Dr. Amel Kara, in a live event, she interviewed one of our patients, Regina. And I thought it's better to hear from her the experience of this disease, because her story is quite typical for the stories we hear. So I have a couple of short video clips from this.
So what led you to go to the doctors and to seek a diagnosis? What kind of symptoms were you experiencing 20 years ago?
Well, it wasn't so much the symptoms I had. I had a brother who was diagnosed with the disease. And at that point, I was made aware that all of his siblings had the gene. Mm-hmm. Okay, and looking at what he was dealing with and what I had experienced all my life, I realized I really should be checked for it, because, all my life I had been tired all the time. I couldn't do things other people did. I couldn't compete. I couldn't play sports because I just didn't have the energy. And I always wondered why they could do it and why I couldn't do it. Even when I had my children, I felt the same way. Why am I having such a hard time taking care of these children when other people can do it with such ease?
So Regina's story here is quite typical for our patient population. She has a mutation in her mitochondrial DNA, and that's passed on through mothers to the children. And most of her family members are actually more affected than she is, but she still has a very severe disease. She speaks about her debilitating fatigue and her muscle weakness, and it can be a little bit difficult to hear what she is saying, because the muscle weakness has also affected her speech. So very typically, this energy deficiency from the deficient mitochondria causes a debilitating fatigue and a myopathy, so muscle involvement. That leads to a reduced quality of life, multisystemic complications, but also a reduced life expectancy. You can see that here on the graph to the left. So some that are severely affected die at a young age, but overall, you see that life expectancy is quite impacted. It's a rare disease, but it's not super rare. It affects about 1 in 5,000 individuals. So speaking about quality of life, I thought this section is also quite heartbreaking, actually.
I have 3 daughters. I have 3 daughters and a son. My 3 daughters will never have children, and they know they'll never have children because they don't want to be life into this world if they're not going to have any quality of life. And that's exactly what mitochondria is. It takes all your quality of life away. So the only grandchildren I have are through my son, and I have 2. I have a little boy and a little girl, but they won't let me take care of them. They won't let me spend time with them because because of my condition right now.
So Regina's story and other patients' story, of course, inspire us to do what we do, but it also helps us to focus our development programs. So this is an overview of our portfolio. I will focus on our lead compound, KL1333, where we have an ongoing phase 2 trial, but with a pivotal study design. So that should hopefully be the last placebo-controlled trial we need before seeking marketing approval. And we have orphan drug designation, fast track designation, and a strong IP of composition of matter patents. So even with quite conservative assumptions, we have a very attractive market opportunity, so sales opportunity for KL1333. So if we look at the number of patients in Europe and US, there should be about 40,000 patients. So with modest assumptions on market penetration and pricing, we'll still have an over $1 billion market opportunity. So looking at the clinical program, we of course listen to patients, but importantly talk to regulators repeatedly, but also payers. And what we found that aligned very well with the patient need is that we were looking at fatigue as one part of the clinical development program, and myopathy, the muscle weakness, as another part. And FDA has supported us to use them as alternative primary endpoints. So that means if either one of them is successful, that will be sufficient for a successful pivotal trial. And we actually had an opportunity to test this already in phase 1. So we had a small cohort, and we saw really promising signals of efficacy, both when we tested fatigue and the muscle function, as you can see in these 2 graphs. And what was also exciting was that the magnitude of change, if we compare to other diseases where there actually are approved treatments, that would be considered clinically meaningful. So we are right now in the middle of this phase 2 study that we call Falcon. So importantly, we have a very careful selection of patients during an extended screening period. We have almost 1 year of placebo-controlled treatment. And as I said, we have 2 primary endpoints, so 2 shots on goal. So just an hour ago, we sent out a press release that the last 24-week visit, the full study is 48 weeks long, but we'll base the interim analysis on 24 weeks of data. And that last patient visit happened this morning. So we started the study with recruiting 40 patients. That will come into an interim analysis that will be really important to de-risk the whole program, both when it comes to safety. Now we can show that we have 24 weeks of safety in this patient population, but also when it comes to the powering assumptions for efficacy. So we will have a conditional power reassessment of the final sample size. So we'll recruit up to 180 patients in total. So with that, I'd just like to ask you to join us if you would like to move forward to develop the first treatment for primary mitochondrial disease.
Thank you, Magnus. So I'd like to start out by talking about mitochondrial disease in general. It's you talk about a rare disease, of course. How much focus do you have to put on raising awareness for this type of disease in order to get, any potential partnering going and deals going and things like that?
Yeah, that's a good question, because most people, at least a few years ago, had never heard of mitochondrial disease. They may be familiar with mitochondria or the mitochloridians from Star Wars. That is gradually changing, but it is of course important for partnering, but also as we start to think about the commercialization. There has been a radical improvement in diagnosis. So this has now become like almost a purely genetically based diagnosis. But still a lot of people go unrecognized. And we expect that, of course, to change when the first treatment becomes available. But that's something that, as we've started the second wave of the Falcon trial, we really need to work on that part to really make sure that the patients that we know are out there are properly diagnosed so we can reach them after we have our approval.
Well, speaking of that, how difficult is it to recruit patients for a trial like this?
I mean, it can be really difficult for rare disease, and we were aware of that, but almost surprisingly, the recruitment rate in this first wave was exactly as we had predicted. So that was a very nice surprise. So we are confident that we will be able to recruit this final part of the study in a timely manner. And I think that also shows that our assumptions on how common these genetic changes in this disease is correct, because we identified actually 91 patients that were screened for the study, but since we're quite selective, only 40 of them were randomized.
And speaking of the Falcon trial, the interim analysis is coming up soon. What sort of preparations are you going through right now for that?
Yeah, so here it's really important that we have really accurate and quality control data. So with this last visit happening today, we will make sure that all data is source verified. We have monitors going out to all the sites. So now we need to make sure that that final data is clean and proper, and then analyzed correctly for an independent data monitoring committee that will look at this data.
And someone in here is curious about your best estimate of a launch date for 1333.
That's a good question, but I can't really address it because I don't know what the final study size will be. But if you look historically how the duration it took about half year to recruit these 40 patients. Then we will expand the number of sites and countries for this second wave, and we'll recruit up to a total of 180 patients. And then it's, of course, a one-year trial. So I think you can do the math and estimations based on that.
All right, do some math, everybody. Well, we're here at the Global Forum. You talked about other countries that you want to go into. Could you maybe be a bit more specific?
So our primary market is US and secondary Europe. So that's also where we run the trial. Lately, it has actually been more. It's been easier to recruit in Europe. The US hasn't really come back from the disturbances from the COVID pandemic, but we think that is changing. So right now we have been recruiting in 6 countries. We are looking to add at least 3 more, but also to expand to more sites in those countries. What's good with this rare disease is that it's often aggregated to certain expert sites. So in the US, for instance, there is a network of expert sites. So that's good both for running the clinical trial, but also, of course, for the next stage of market engagement and accessing that market.
Well, anyway, a lot of exciting things coming up for Abliva. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. But thank you so much, Magnus, for your
Thank you.
presentation.